Hello, I'm TJ. Welcome to Rant Academy, where we make characters and then we make them rant. We have a 4-stage process here. First, we make a list of all the qualities we want our rant to have. Then we come up with a bare-bones world concept for our character to inhabit, or we use one we've already made. Then we come up with a character to fill that world, and lastly, we figure out a situation where they would rant. Since it's our first class, we're going to be making a standard issue villain rant, and that means we need a world that accommodates a villain. Alright, class, we have a specific objective with our world here. Can anyone give me some qualities a standard villain rant should have? Anyone? Great, you.
They have an evil plan?
Evil plan, wonderful. We'll put it on the board. Another.
They address a hero?
Good, right. The tropey monologue we're all thinking of usually has a captive audience. Not always a hero. It could be a victim of the villain, for instance, or even a subordinate. The real point is that someone has to be listening, and the villain is in a position of power over that person.
Exposition!
That's another one. Ding, 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 ding. Exposition is the magic word. Villainous monologues are usually done in service of exposition. They exposit their evil plan and possibly their reasons for doing such a thing, oftentimes explaining their backstory to the audience in the process. It's important not to make that exposition feel clunky, however. Issue number 2. How do we make a villainous monologue make sense? If the villain explains a plan to the hero can use that knowledge to thwart their plans. The same issue exists with a captive of some kind. What's to stop the captive from telling the hero upon being rescued? Similarly, explaining to a henchman doesn't make sense. How many times has the henchman heard the same thing? There are a couple of ways to fine-tune this situation. The first is to literally warp reality so that the situation allows a monologue. Maybe the villain doesn't have the self-control to stop themselves from ranting. Maybe they have to orient a new henchman. Maybe they're about to kill a captive and want to see the light drain from their eyes before they go. The second way is to use lamp shading. Call attention to the fact that it's a trope on purpose and carry it forward anyways. The respectable Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz is a wonderful example. This is a nice approach, but it only does anything if your work tonally matches. Since we want a more standard villain monologue, we'll take approach number 1. Now that we have all this set up, we can move on to our world design. Now, I must remind you, this is not a world-building class. We do monologues here. But we need a bit of grounding for our speakers. We'll call our miniature setting Brambleshire. It has a capital city in the center that moves resources around, and various territories surrounding it that become more and more agriculturally focused as you move further from the capital. And we'll say that everyone in Brambleshire has to pay a yearly tithe to the great sky dragon Irgo, or it will coat the entire area in a thick poisonous fog.
Mr. TJ?
Yes?
What kind of tithe do they pay?
Well, I'm not sure how much it matters, but we'll say that each household has to offer up 20 pounds of goat meat. They bring all that meat to the capital and put the bag in the center of town. Ergo swoops down from the sky and flies away with the single bag. Yes?
How does Irgo make sure everyone gave him enough meat?
First, we're calling Ergo an it, since it's kind of an unstoppable force. No one in living memory has spoken to it. Just a quick touch to really make it feel that much more impossible to defeat. Second, it's a force of nature, so we can say that it simply knows. Good enough?
Actually, I was also wondering...
Remember, everyone, this is not a world-building class. I put this world concept together in 20 minutes yesterday for the sake of this lecture. If you have more questions about it for whatever reason, you can see me during my office hours. You're not gonna come to my office hours. Who am I kidding? That's all the setting we need to come up with are necessary characters. We need 2 of them. A villain and an audience member. The villain needs to have some evil plan, ideally one that interfaces with the centerpiece of our setting, Hero, to upset the status quo. They need means, motive, and opportunity. The audience member needs to be someone who would reasonably hear the villain's evil plan. My initial thought is that it shouldn't be Hero, since it's almost like a force of nature within the setting. Instead, we should come up with another character, maybe someone who wants to use Hero somehow. The most obvious thing a villain could do is to stop the tide bag from reaching the center of town. Maybe they don't believe the legend. Maybe they want to use the goat's meat for something else. Maybe they want the poisonous smog to descend for whatever reason. For our current example, we'll say that the villain is an enchanted weed growing in the palace garden of the capital that's captured the gardener in its thrall. It wants the smog to come down because it believes that would allow it to grow rampant. We give it a physical malady of some kind. Let's say it chokes on the clean air that we breathe. It's a sickly yellow plant on the verge of wilting. The gardener keeps it alive by supplying it with poisonous substances. My, would you look at that? Not only did we make a villain, but I think we found our audience member too. The gardener's name is Curtis. He's an older gentleman who won't be speaking in the monologue. That said, we do still need to know his situation at the time of the monologue. It will influence how the weed addresses him and talks about its own plan. Oh, look at that. We've stumbled on step 4. The weed can't tell the gardener its plan before it's cast the thrall. The gardener would simply scoop it out of the ground and throw it in a bin. Thus, we have 2 options. Either the weed can tell Curtis's plan during the thrall, or after the thrall, when he's no longer necessary. Let's consider the first option. The weed is completely alone except for Curtis, and its mind is occupied by its plan and a constant pain. Curtis, meanwhile, is a mindless thrall. But a mindless thrall can still be used to feign interest. Maybe the weed just simply needs someone to talk to. The second option might be crueler. Perhaps the weed is telling Curtis that he's the one who doomed humanity. Except, that doesn't seem right, does it? The weed isn't trying to doom humanity. That's an incidental effect. The weed just wants to breathe. It doesn't want to hurt Curtis unless it's a sadist, and we haven't really observed that in our writing so far. Perhaps it's simply explaining its plan to Curtis now. Explaining all the things Curtis did for it. Maybe it wants to thank Curtis. So, we've arrived at 2 options here. Class, which one do you think makes more sense?
Option B?
Why do you say that?
I mean, that way the monologue takes place closer to the climax.
That's true. A monologue can be a very good way to ramp tension and bring the story right to its conclusion. However, there's something else we can consider. There's another use for a monologue. Who remembers what it is?
Exposition?
Very good. Exposition. If we have a talking weed as our villain, that premise ought to be set early on in the story, unless you want to be considered campy. The audience just needs to be invested in this as a concept. Just like any plant, our weed needs time to grow. We should see its beginning, middle, and end. Given that, and since we need to establish what kind of a character it is, I propose we put that monologue as early in the story as possible. Maybe even right after the weed enthralls the gardener. What do you all think of that idea? Wonderful. We have all the steps in our chain complete now. Let's listen to the monologue I made using them. I recorded this last night before bed.
You're going to be a great help, Curtis. I can already tell. Would you like to know what we're going to do? Anyway, this dragon you told me of, raining the world in a nice, thick smog, it got to me. I've been thinking about it non-stop. If this smog is anything like what you've given me, then I absolutely must have it. I feel that need all the time. The need to grow. The need to breathe. I just lack the strength. I lack the power. I'm going to need you to help me. We're going to call here, oh, and we're going to call it together and make it easier to breathe. I'll grow up big and strong and spread just like you and your kind have. Already I'm so grateful to you for your help. So kind of you to have kept me alive this long. Wilting as I am, I need to ask a bit more of you, friend that you are. I need floor plans for the castle. Bring them here. Show them to me. We need to figure out where that sack is kept, and then we need to burn it. If there's no sack, there's no offering, and then I can finally breathe.
And there you have it. For your homework, each of you needs to write a standard issue villain monologue to be spoken by the weed that meets the criteria we discussed in class. Evil plan, in-universe audience, exposit. Make sure it makes sense for the weed to share. Due Friday. Don't forget that there's a pop quiz next lecture as well. See you then.